our goal, our vision as a company is to be your go-to solution for lung cancer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Executives, the show where we navigate the intricate world of executive leadership, exploring strategies, insights, and personal stories of successful professionals shaping the global business landscape. I'm your host, Majid, and joining us today is Andrea Stephany, the co-founder and CEO of OncoSwab, a biotech startup making waves in lung cancer detection. With a strong background in molecular biotechnology and a passion for science communication, Andrea combines entrepreneurship and innovation to create real-world impact. I am really excited to have her share her journey and insights with us today. Hola y bienvenida al podcast, Andrea.
Gracias, Majid. Hola. Muchas gracias.
I mean, my Spanish starts at hola and it ends at gracias. So everything in the middle is like, it doesn't exist.
Well, you said a full sentence today, so congratulations.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time today. So I would love, normally I'm always struggling with people who have a lot of experience, trying to put everything into the introduction, into a crammed introduction. Like imagine going through the entire life of someone within 2 or 3 sentences. So I've decided that I will just say a few things and then I will give you the stage so you can tell more about who is Andrea Stephany.
So a bit about myself. I am the CEO and co-founder of OncoSwab, as you said, a biotech company focusing on lung cancer detection. I'm very flattered by you saying that it's difficult to cram up years and years of experience into a few sentences. But luckily for you, with me, it'll be a little easier because I started the company when I was 24. So it was a couple of years of experience before I started doing this. Before being a founder, I was a science communicator and also I was in the biotechnology industry doing stem cell research in Germany. Before that, I was in academia doing research in nanomedicine and applications of this field to stroke treatment and sepsis as well. My background is in biochemistry and I got a master's in molecular biotechnology. And the reason I ended up being a founder is because I was selected as one of the top 100 young scientists to participate in this hackathon that the European Union organized. It's a European Commission sponsored and organized called EU Talenton. And I was scrolling on Instagram one day when I was still working in Germany as a research assistant, and I saw this ad that said disruptive minds needed. And I obviously immediately clicked on it. I was like, wait, what? I think I'm a disruptive mind. And it was the ad for this hackathon. And it's funny because I hesitated about really applying to this hackathon or not, because up until this point, I was the kind of person that I at least had the feeling that I never got accepted into these things. I had applied to like summer schools and research facilities, like all the coolest internships here in California back when I was in college. I never really got any of those things. So I had told myself that I'm not the kind of person that gets accepted into those things, which is totally the wrong mindset. But then literally the last day of the application, because of course I had postponed it, the last day, hours before the deadline, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And all the questions were like, why do you think you're a good fit for this program? Why do you think you should be selected? Like selling yourself, I guess, in a way. And I was like, I'm not going to answer the standard, oh yeah, I have a background in this and I went to this university for my master's. I'm like, no, I'm gonna tell them like my story and like why I want to make an impact and why I think cancer, because there were different mission arenas. The one I selected was cancer. Why I think I want to innovate in the field of cancer, which was that when I was in college studying cancer biology, I was like, I'll never, ever, ever do anything that has to do with cancer. This is too complicated. It's impossible to beat. Cancer cells always find a way to come back. I don't want to be in that field. So that kind of that thought and that mindset is what drove me to really wanting to find something that was truly innovative. And I got in. And I was so excited when I got in. And little did I know that one weekend, it was like 4 days, was going to change the course of my life. That's where OncoSwab, the idea for what now is OncoSwab, was born. That's where I met my co-founder, Pablo, who is the CSO of the company. And the rest is history.
Nice. I'm thinking about all the applications I've applied to and got shadowed or no answer for. But I think this is part of the process, right? Life. That you don't get selected everywhere, but the right opportunity has to come for you. Imagine if you got into another internship, then OncoSwab might not even be there right now, right? So
Totally. Totally, yeah.
True. No, but happy for you. I mean, cancer detection itself is a really interesting topic. I mean, I was super happy that when I saw, I was like, very good that we have someone doing something for that, because it's like, cancer itself is very complicated, like you mentioned. I mean, I have studied a bit about cancer, but not as much as you. So I mean, but it's super also interesting for me. But before we talk about our fancy topic, we don't do simple stuff in the executives. We only do executive bling, so professional bling. I have a random question, absolutely random. But the
Mhm.
question is, if you could be any character from any book or movie, who would it be and why?
Okay, no, you know what? I really struggle with this type of questions because I'm like, no, I have to give the perfect answer, like the answer that represents me the most, not what I just come up with in that moment. So I need to think thoroughly about every single book I've read and every movie I've watched and every history lesson I've ever received. Okay, it's really hard for me to just say one person, but there is one person that I always come back to when I need inspiration when it comes to being a multidisciplinary individual and exceeding and excelling at many different areas, which is something that is now in our time is kind of frowned upon. But I guess for this time, he just managed to continue to defy the odds. That's Leonardo da Vinci. I think that he was a 10 out of 10 in every single aspect that he decided to focus on, whether that was art, science, any field that he decided to focus on, he left a legacy individually in one single lifetime. He managed to continue to improve himself and learn and get better at each of these individual fields. And that I think is truly impressive, especially the reason why I particularly look back at it, not look back, but like the reason I particularly admire that is because now we are told that we have to focus on one thing, and that's something I kind of struggle with. So I'm, in the startup, in the company, and we can talk about this, we have one focus and one focus only. I do think that that is very important, but at the same time, as an individual, I struggle because there are so many things I like. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm
Mm.
completely devoted and passionate to this company, but at the same time, I recently discovered I love dancing. And now I'm like going to hip hop classes every single week. And it's something that, I always thought I had in me, but I never fully explored because that, like, being, for example, being a scientist doesn't go well with being a dancer. And I'm not saying I'm going to be a dancer now, but like, didn't allow myself to tap into the different aspects of myself, like creativity. And when I was a kid, I loved to write songs, for example. And again, it's something that as a society, you're told, well, if you're a scientist, you can't do that, or you shouldn't really do that. That doesn't really go with the image of a scientist. And I think Leonardo da Vinci is somebody that completely defied those odds. So it's insane that he even existed.
This century is like a little bit strange as well. I mean, people do get accepted also for doing multiple things. So I think it's actually good, because I remember I met someone recently, and this guy was a hedge fund, like he runs a hedge fund, and then he said he runs it successfully because he plays the piano, and he says whenever I'm playing the piano, I'm sort of also, like, my creative brain starts opening up,
Yeah.
and he was really good with that, like really good. So I mean, that's a good example, to be honest. Like, I never thought of him. I mean, I'm also struggling with answering this question, so I was like, let's ask other people what do they think. So thank you for that. But today we are sitting for discussing the topic of innovating early cancer detection, the journey of OncoSwab, and also the future of biotech. Before we like look into the future, let's look at the past. So what inspired you to actually start OncoSwab? And since you come from the same background, right, in biochemistry and molecular biotechnology, how did this help you shape the vision of the company?
Yeah. Well, I love the question about looking at the past because that's exactly what we did. We identified this big problem that was detection in lung cancer, right? Lung cancer detection always comes too late. 20% of the cases are detected in early stages, which is when it's really treatable. Other than that, it isn't. And from that 20%, a lot of those are incidental. So there's many people that don't know they have a lung cancer growing inside of them, but because they find themselves in a car accident or any other unrelated situation, they find out that there is a nodule that could be cancerous or a mass in their lungs that could be cancerous, right? So if you think about it, it doesn't make sense that the number one cause of cancer death is always detected late, meaning that as a system, we should do a better job in making it as easy as possible to diagnose and to detect, because we can't rely on our bodies alone showing signs like like happens with other types of cancer like skin or breast, where it's a bit more superficial, so there can be signs earlier. The lung is an internal organ, it's a strong organ, it's one of the most important organs we have in our body, so of course it's going to be resistant. By the time it starts to complain, it might be too late. So what we did was at the hackathon, we said, okay, what are other examples of things that have worked in the past, right? When it comes to early detection. And of course, the first thing we had to think of was COVID. If you think about it, everybody, got tested for COVID. And there are certain factors that made it be so successful. And that was ease of use, proximity to your location, cost effectiveness, non-invasiveness. It didn't require specifically trained personnel. It was just very approachable. It was very easy to do. If COVID required complicated testing like other type of cancers do, we would not have had the same results, right? So what we thought was, what if we copy and paste exactly those success factors into lung cancer? And that's how we kind of reverse engineered the solution. Instead of developing a science like a technology first, which is what typically happens with biotech companies, we didn't develop technology first and then find an application to it. We found a really big problem, thought about what the easiest solution humanly possible would be, and then build the technology around that solution.
That's actually true, because I remember in the beginning the COVID testing was done, like they would put it like in the till the brain, like you would be like this, and then
Yeah.
eventually they came up with a new one where you just like at the beginning of this or in the mouth, literally on the edges, and it was tested. I mean, I know people who were also tested positive with those ones in the mouth.
The saliva, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I don't know how it works, but no, that's actually true. So how does it work? Like if we were to explain to someone who doesn't come from OncoSwab, like not OncoSwab, who doesn't come from a biochemistry background, how would you sell it to them? That what is it? Because you mentioned cost effective, you mentioned ease of use, you mentioned like you gave the example of COVID. So how would you sell this to someone who's, because you're also trying to ask them, hey, you know what, you want to check that, do you have
Yeah.
cancer, lung cancer, or no?
So without getting into details because of confidentiality, essentially the overall concept is that our lungs are constantly picking up and eliminating debris, meaning things that we no longer need in that area. So when there's a tumor growing, that tumor would also shed things that belong to the tumor, and that all that will also be part of the debris, and that debris will end up in the airway because we have these little tentacles in the lung called the cilia, and the cilia are the ones that bring up and eliminate that debris. So our theory was, if that is constantly happening in our lungs and there's tumors that are growing there, there's a tumor growing there that's shedding material, that should mean that we should be able to pick up this material and consider it a biomarker for lung cancer. And that is the correlation between lung cancer presence or a tumor present in the lung and the nasal fluid.
That's really simple. I was considering that it would be like super hard or super complex, and then
No.
the because I recently went through a medical procedure like a few months back, and the doctor, when he told me last year, like, hey, we need to do this, one of the doctors was dead serious, like I mean, his personality was like that, and the way he told me was like, what can happen if the surgery goes wrong? So he literally counted that I could die about 40 different times, and I
Yeah.
was like, is there anything where shit doesn't hit the ceiling and I don't die, I actually come out alive? And then the basically another doctor surgeon walked in, and he was like, Majid, you seem like you were bitten by a snake or something. I'm like, yeah, apparently your doctor here just like loves to kill people. So he's like, no, it's not like that. He's like, the things he's explaining, they happen rarely. And then if you tell people that, hey, we are going to test you for lung cancer, they would already be like, oh, you know, because it's something that
That is true. That does happen, and that's also related to the stigma around lung cancer, right? Because typically the people that you will bring up lung cancer testing to are smokers, particularly heavy smokers, and we see that in many ways. So, well, first of all, there aren't many countries that have a screening program. That is changing. The European Union is coming up with this big program to enhance the presence of lung cancer screening all across Europe, because right now there's only a handful of countries that have it there. In the US, we do have lung cancer screening programs, but the adherence rate, meaning the rates of screening, are around 10%, definitely less than 20%, but very, very low numbers. And especially when you compare it to other types of screenings, right? Other type of cancers. What we have seen is that there's a multitude of factors. One is, again, the ease of use, like the barriers, but also the lack of awareness, because there's something that has to be said about lung cancer. There is a lack of awareness, generally speaking. Historically, that has been because lung cancer has always been a very deadly disease. The survival rates are increasing. We're at around 20% here in the States, which is, still there's room for improvement for sure, but it's a lot better than it used to be. It used to be less than 10%. So, considering that, if you think about it, there really aren't that many survivors to advocate for lung cancer. So that's one of the reasons, but there's less activity in the advocacy space. That has completely changed. Now there are many, many groups and many patient advocacy groups. So that is definitely changing. Another thing is, of course, the stigma, as I mentioned. So it is hard typically for people to proactively seek screening and get screened. And that
Mm.
is something that, as well as a company, we want to change. In fact, it's Lung Cancer Awareness Month next month in November, and we have this big campaign coming up to, you know, contribute in any way we can to demystify many things about lung cancer screening, and also truly work to get lung cancer to get to a point where it's beyond that, where it goes beyond that image of being just a smoker's disease, because it isn't. In fact, non-smoking related lung cancer is the fifth most common cancer in the States. It is very prevalent, and it's increasing in women in their 40s that have never smoked, and we still don't know why. And those people really have no access to screening, because screening currently is only accessible for individuals that have smoked for 20 years, at least a pack a day. So 20 pack years. So heavy, heavy, heavy smokers. There's a lot of changes that need to happen. Part of the reason why the criteria is so restrained is because at the end of the day, lung cancer screening right now, the guidelines suggest doing low dose CT scans, which is, low dose, as the name implies, is a lower dose of radiation, but it's still radiation. According to the guidelines, individuals should be screened from 50 to 80 years old. That's 30 years of constant exposure to radiation. So of course that's the reason why some countries are hesitant about installing these new guidelines. And that's where companies like ours come into play. Although we're not focusing on screening right now, that is our long-term goal, of course, to make it as easy and accessible as possible. So we imagine a world where you can get screened for lung cancer just as you did with COVID, just with a nasal swab at the ease of
Mm.
your home, a point of care, CVS, Walmart, doctor's office, you name it, but something that's very accessible, so that we eliminate that risk of the constant exposure to radiation. And once we do that, we can include other individuals that are at lesser risk of lung cancer than heavy smokers, but are still at risk and currently have no option to get screened whatsoever.
Mm. I mean, the last case about lung cancer was actually one of my friend's wife. She's probably in her early 30s, was detected with lung cancer, and
Wow.
never smoked in her life, never. So
Wow.
it was very surprising for me. Like, I was like, "Oh, that's weird." And I think the whole health dynamics, especially with the lungs element, has changed massively because of COVID, because COVID was
Yeah.
also attacking lungs, right? I mean, I saw a lot of issues in myself as well because of COVID. But now you mentioned something, it's a little off topic, but it's also important that you're saying that there were not many advocates, right? But there is something happening in November, which is because it's like to promote that people need to take care about their health and so on. So how can actually someone who doesn't have lung cancer actually support in that movement as well, because that's also something important, right? I know it's not connected to OncoSwab, but it's a topic we should talk about, right, at the end.
100%. I think it's actually 100% connected to OncoSwab because it's part of the same mission, right? Which is simplifying lung cancer detection. And that starts really with awareness. And it's a long term plan. That's what my team and I always talk about. Like, we're heavily focused on our science, but we still try to, in a way or another, contribute to the awareness because if we as a company want to be also, I mean, our goal, our vision as a company is to be your go to solution for lung cancer. And the entire longitudinal process of lung cancer care. So it's a long term plan to also participate in that awareness. That's why we start now as a very, very small company. So I do think that it's very pertinent. How can an individual support the awareness, even if they don't have lung cancer? I think there are many, many ways. Starting from your local community. For example, individuals here in San Francisco, there is a lung cancer gala organized by probably the biggest patient advocacy group, which is GoTo for lung cancer. November 2nd, there is a lung cancer gala. So coming to this gala, so it's a fundraising gala. Participating in these events is a wonderful way to collaborate, and that's just a local support, right? So beyond that, something that anyone can do everywhere is on LinkedIn, supporting these groups, supporting companies like ours, just like by being there, by being present and amplifying their work. That's something that anybody can do. And from a more personal perspective, if there's anyone in your life that is a smoker, that is at high risk for any reason, talking about screening and encouraging them to talk about these problems with their primary care doctor. That is also part of the story of OncoSwab because my mom had, right when we were starting OncoSwab a little before, my mom had, who's a smoker, unfortunately for me and for everyone, um, in Spain, people smoke a lot. So it is, I mean, most of my friends smoke. It is so ironic. Like when I'm in Spain, I'm hanging out with my friends and I'm at a table with like 12 people. I'm the single only person that's not smoking. It is really, really wild. But well, back to the story. My mom had this very, very bad cough and it wouldn't go away. And she was experiencing some things, right? And of course, like the two things come together as we're at the hackathon and we are one of the things we have to do is we have to call people or interview people and ask them why they haven't got screened or like understand really what the problem was. That's kind of where we got to the barrier problem. I called my mom. I was like, Mom, you've had this cough for a while now. You smoke. Shouldn't you get screened? She was like, I would love to get screened. I would love to get tested. I don't know how to do it. And that's when we started this project of getting my mom tested for lung cancer. Like, God forbid, like we were hoping she was fine, but like, she fit the criteria. So of course it makes perfect sense that you just want to see if you're okay, just like to rule it out. And I kid you not, from that moment to the moment she was told, no, you're fine, you don't have lung cancer, 15 months went by. 15 months of all kinds of unnecessary procedures, medical testing, just doctor visits, countless things, except for the one scan that could have ruled out everything because she wasn't spitting blood, maybe because she didn't have like any really strong symptoms. She just had this cough, just quote unquote, right? So luckily we were of course very happy to hear that it was all fine and she ended up having another medical problem that she's now treating. But this allowed me to experience firsthand that if God forbid she ever were to have a problem, it's just going to be the system is way too slow for that. And the system will want to see severe symptoms, worrisome symptoms of lung cancer before they truly act, at least in countries like Spain. And by then, it might be too late. So that's
Mm.
when I realized it's my mission, it's my responsibility to make sure my mom gets tested every single year as a high risk individual and those I care about because the system is not doing it right now.
Mm. No, in Germany, I don't think they specifically promote lung cancer, but they generally tell you that, hey, get yourself checked. Like generally, like after 30s, you should do a free medical checkup. But it's still like, I mean, cancer in general, should you check lung cancer or should you check other kind of cancer? So it's every cancer has a different like checkup, right? As well, how do you check? But now, coming back to the topic, because one, you're a startup. Two, you're a startup in health tech. Three, you're actually in the uh, technology slash health tech, right? So it makes it harder and harder because startups have challenges, and then when you put health tech through it, then it becomes challenge times 10, because getting things approved, getting things is a massive challenge. So we'd love to understand also, like, what were some of the challenges or some of the toughest challenges that you actually faced in the early stages of starting OncoSwab, and how did you overcome them?
Oh my god. The whole podcast interview could be about the challenges. It's been insane. I think the single biggest challenge, I know it right off the bat because it's been the biggest nightmare, is accessing patient samples. So you would think, oh, it's just a swab. It's so easy. It's just a swab. Like some, in comparison to other biotech companies, they do like full on clinical trials with a drug they just discovered and might change, and might, put at risk the patient's life. In comparison to other companies, you would think that it would be a lot easier for us to get access to patient samples. I guess it is easier than them, but it's still really hard. You're still dealing with patient lives. You're still dealing with human samples, and that always entails a procedure, a ethics committee, a lot of people involved, lots of paperwork, and hospitals that need to approve. And even before all of that, doctors that believe in your idea, which at the beginning was really really hard for us. Probably the first, I'm gonna say, a year or so, maybe less than a year, but it was really hard to get any doctor to like give us the time of the day, because realistically it was just this crazy idea of diagnosing cancer in a nose. So understandably so, they were very not skeptic. Like they liked the idea, but I think that if we had some evidence, it would have been easier. Not the first year, it was less than a year, but you get the point, right? It was just a concept that was not that hard to prove whether it worked or not in our heads, but it was really hard to get off the ground because of that, because of the craziness of the idea, right? And because of how unrealistic it sounds at first. And funny enough, now that we have proved it, now that we have a proof of concept, etc., now everybody thinks it's obvious. Now everybody thinks, well, of course this works. I just wonder why nobody thought about this before. Like, of course it works. And I'm like, I wish people would have had these reactions when we first started. But yes, so probably accessing patient samples was the hardest part. Also, like some other companies like ours, they take retrospective samples, which means samples that are already collected in a biobank. But we were creating something completely new. Most of our competitors do blood tests, and they do blood draw. So of course you can get blood from anywhere. But nasal swabs, in the particular patient population we're looking for, are actually not easy to come across. And also we have a particular swab, etc. So we had to collect the patients, we had to collect the samples prospectively. And now the ball is rolling. Finally, our clinical trials started already, and they're ongoing as we speak. A few hospitals in Europe are collecting samples, which is insane. It's a massive milestone for us, but this was getting to this point took us a very very long time. So that's one thing. The second thing would probably be, of course, as you said, the regulatory aspect. Also, we are in the middle of all of these changes in the political landscape as well, and many legal changes as well. So the FDA came out with a rule that has not officially been accepted yet, but there's a chance it might be, that impacts businesses like ours. We are a diagnostic company, which means that we can sell, technically, we can sell a diagnostic test without FDA approval, as long as it's always manufacture, done, analyze the whole thing in one lab that has approval. It's called a CLIA certified lab. And that test is what we call a laboratory developed test. So our plan was and is to launch as a laboratory developed test, because that gives you some time until you get FDA approval to collect real world evidence and also essentially be commercial, right? Which helps with, of course, revenue generation, and ultimately coverage is what you want as well. But now the FDA is trying to impose stricter and stricter control upon LDTs, laboratory developed tests, so that it can't operate as freely. and that impacts our regulatory plan as well, because that changes essentially everything. So keeping all of those things into account, I constantly have the feeling that I need to plan like 3 years ahead, but very, very in a lot of detail. Like we cannot make many mistakes from what we do here to what we do 3 years from now, because these are really long-term plans when it comes to regulatory approvals. And if we do a very big mess up that takes us 6 months, for example, that can have consequences after the 3 year period ends, and there's a chance that we have to start the whole thing all over again, when it comes to trials and regulatory approval preparations. So, and as you know, of course, a startup cannot afford to start a 3 year process all over again. So I feel like things need to be planned very meticulously, but I am confident that we have a very good team of experts that have done this before, both from the regulatory perspective and the commercialization perspective. So that's when a good advisory team comes into play. It's essentially crucial. Like, there's no way on earth an unexperienced CEO can just decide what to do here. You 100% need experienced people that have done this before to tell you and to guide you through what you need to do.
No, I agree. I agree. It is important, like advisory role, especially in a startup like yours. I think it can add a lot of value. I mean, I worked with fintech startups where advisors helped them a lot, like getting approvals and so on, because they had done it like 10 times before. So for them to do it the 11th time was like a piece of cake. They would tell them, "Hey, do this," and then apply for the license. Was done much faster because they knew the regulations. They knew what is the requirement from the regulators, how to process data and so on. So got it approved much faster. And then I've seen startups as well in the fintech domain, because that's where I come from, that did not listen, did not have advisors, struggling for literally 3 years to get a basic approval even to do anything. But now, like you, because you mentioned now that you just started or you're doing trials, is it something like people can reach out to you, or just like no, it's like doctors actually say that, hey, you know what, you should do this one, or like how does it work?
Oh yeah, no, people cannot reach out to us. I mean, not yet. At some point, we probably will, but no. What the way it works is you do a trial with a hospital. So it's a very elaborate and complex thing to do. You have to write a protocol, and then you first have to find a champion within a hospital, somebody that wants to take the extra burden of time and effort to try whatever little technology you're playing around with, right? Like, you really have to convince this one doctor and this one team of doctors. Um, we are very fortunate to have in our team one of the biggest KOLs in lung cancer, who is right now the chief of pulmonary medicine at Mount Sinai. His name is Dr. Javier Zulueta. And since he joined the team, everything changed for us, because before having him as a like KOL championing us, it was really hard for us to convince doctors, as I said. Also, there's a group of things that probably influence that. It's the fact that we didn't come from the space. Like, we are my co-founder and I both have scientific backgrounds, research backgrounds, but not MD backgrounds, right? So there's that. The fact that we had just started off as a company. I mean, it was really Dr. Sulueta who took a leap of faith and said, I think this technology could really change lung cancer forever, and I want to support them. And then he just opened the door to all of his connections. And of course, he knows everyone that's important in the lung cancer space. And this was truly a game changer for us, because then the ball just started rolling after that when it comes to accessing hospitals for the trials. So, yeah, so back to how it works. Then after you find the doctor that really wants to take on the time and effort to support you with this trial, which is already a really big milestone on its own, right? That means that your technology is truly solving a problem that they are excited about solving as well. So that's on its own really a good signal, right? After that, you write this very detailed protocol about how it's going to work, and then the doctor has to do internal work at the hospital to get the protocol approved. Typically, there's an ethics committee that has to review it. This part is the longest part. So everything I just mentioned so far can take 6 months or more to get a protocol approved. So it's not B2B SaaS startup type of speed, unfortunately. Like, we had investors that asked a specific experiment. They're like, okay, we'll invest if you show us this one result. And they made that request in like May, and we're going to only get the results from that experiment they requested in November. So that's months. Anything you do in a biotech startup will take months, unfortunately, when it comes to like the actual patient samples, patient testing. Okay, and then once the protocol is approved by the ethics committee, now the doctor or the team or whoever it is knows what the exclusion criteria and inclusion criteria are. In our case, it's patients with pulmonary nodules, suspicious pulmonary nodules, because that is the indication that we are focusing on treating or diagnosing. Once the doctor identifies a patient that qualifies, meets this criteria, then the patient is included in the trial. That is how it works. So then they send us the samples and then we analyze it and then something comes out. So it'll be months. You typically do this for months or a year, or however long it is. Typically there's like a result or midpoint readouts and then the end results, and then typically you publish a paper, and that's how it works. And then you probably start over again because you're constantly doing trials in a biotech startup.
I know that it takes really long because I've had another guest from Biotech. She was in the sustainability packaging for syringes and so on, and they said the same, like 2 years. And the investor waited, by the way, like for the tests to be approved.
Oh yeah.
They waited. They were like, yeah, because the investor mindset is very different. Not most of the health tech investors are like very different. They are because they come from the same backgrounds, so they know it takes time. It cannot be like a SaaS startup. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I've started doing like a project with someone, a POC. 2 weeks ago, literally built something out through an automation software, tried like pumping it out, did not work, closed the project. So the guy was like, so it was that fast, imagine.
No, but there are different. It's a different game, right? So like the investors know that it's going to take longer, but in my humble point of view, they see it as an advantage. Why? Because once you have taken those 6 months, 2 years, whatever, to complete a trial, and it's a successful trial, let's say we finish a trial next year, and it's successful, and it shows that our technology is perfectly compatible with the intended use application. If a competitor wants to do exactly the same thing we're doing, A, we're patented, right? C and B, well, we're patent pending, I should say. And B, they now have to do the whole trial again. They have to do that trial that's going to take them another 2 years. So we have a 2 year leeway and for competitors to
Okay.
catch up with us, right? So and that not just us, right? Like it might take a big company 6 months instead of 2 years, like it did to us because we have less funds. That's for sure. I'm not saying that you're that's not a possibility, but there's always that aspect, right? And that's something that when we were racing our very first round, I remember our first check-in was like this group of guys, friends of mine, that were starting to do angel investment, and they had only done investments in B2B SaaS, and their background was B2B SaaS, and they knew nothing about biotech. And they asked me, why should we invest in a biotech company if everything takes so much longer and the risk is so much higher? You don't know if you're going to get approved or not. You don't know if the trial's going to go well or not. And I said, well, it sounds kind of binary, and it kind of is. The thing is, if you invest in a B2B SaaS company and it's good, and in 3 months after doing an accelerator program, they have this whole MVP worked out and they're starting to get customers, etc., everyone and their mothers is going to start to copy them. And the amount of competitors you can get in 3 months as a B2B SaaS company is insane. Whereas in a biotech company, oh, we do have competitors, don't get me wrong, but there are many more ways to protect yourself. That is intellectual property, and that is those research trials that I'm mentioning. It's just going to take longer by definition for competitors to catch up.
That really does make sense. And also, you were part of also Accelerator, right? And you mentioned that there was good support from, example, I forgot the name of the doctor that you just mentioned now. So that doctor supported you. So how does support like the Accelerator or like, for example, hospitals and doctors actually help you? You touched on it, but I would love to also understand from the part of an accelerator, because for a B2B SaaS product, like you mentioned, MVP, in like they end up with an MVP, a few connections here and there, they get a customer, paying customer. But with you, it's not the same, because if an accelerator program is only 3 months, you probably would have done the documentation to start doing the trials or something. So
Yeah,
how
I feel
does
like
that
the
help you guys?
KPIs, yeah, I feel like the KPIs are different because when you do an accelerator as a SaaS company or B2B, whatever, any other technology startup, your KPIs are okay, how much progress internally can I make? How much can I build in 3 months? In a company like ours, in a healthcare company, life science company, it might not be about how much progress when it comes to building can I make in 3 months, because that we don't have that power. It's mostly about, I would say for us at least, strategy, because strategy is everything. You know, the science is going to take a long time. Like, everybody understands the science is going to take a long time, and it's also a risk. The science might work, the science might not work. We're still in the early days. Like, we have very, very promising proof of concept data, but it remains to be seen whether it's fit enough to our application is, our technology is good enough to replace the standard of care, or be as good as the standard of care, right? So everybody that supports the company takes that risk, but it's a risk that a lot of people are willing to take. Because why? Because a company, a biotech company, is maybe 20% of the science, and there's like 80% of everything else. What you do, where you're gonna go, what your reimbursement strategy is, what your intended use is, and what your pipeline is, what your intellectual property strategy is. All of those things do depend on you, right? And for us, and depend on you, depend on the company, it can move at your typical startup speed. At OncoSwab, I would say they truly do. I think we have been very fast in getting everything together the way we have, considering that we incorporated the company in March 2023. Like, the fact that we're now at clinical trial stage is really, I mean, to me, I'm very proud of my team and everything we've accomplished. And that is because we have been able to move at your typical startup speed, even though we know and you count on the fact that the R&D is going to be slower. When we started the accelerator we did last year, that was Health Wildcatters. It's a Texas-based accelerator. Paolo and I literally knew nothing. Like, that we started it in August, September. We had incorporated in March. We had working on the idea for a few months. We had worked on the idea for a few months. It was idea phase, and then we incorporated, and then started to see like what we could do, and then kind of like started to raise to get the first samples. You know, it was all your typical startup progress, but we were definitely very confused. Why? Because one thing is, as I said, R&D can be like, the science can be like 20% of a startup company, a biotech company. You have a great idea, cool. You have a great technology, cool. So what do you do? Where do you start? Who do you talk to? Who's going to buy? What is the current clinical workflow look like? All of those things you need to know, you need to understand. And two scientists that are leading a company can have a really hard time doing that. And what we encountered was that there were just so many options for us. And lung cancer is truly a field with so much untapped potential. There's so much innovation needed. It's a huge market on its own. It's, again, it affects 2+ million people a year. The 2+ million people are diagnosed every year. 1.3 million people die every year. And that is just the new cases and deaths. There's also people that are currently in treatment, people in remission, people that get screened every year, people that are already battled the disease and now are getting tested every few months. Like, it's a very big market on its own, and it's very outdated. So what happens when you work in a market like that is that when you do your customer interviews or your stakeholder interviews, you see that what you're working on can excites a lot of people because it solves many different problems. That sounds like a good thing, but at the very early days of a startup can be super dangerous, because I, after each interview, would be like, oh wow, we could do this, and then I'd do another interview and it'd be like, oh no, forget that idea, we could do that, right? So we were a mess. I remember the first year of the startup was by far the hardest because of the immense amount of opportunity that I saw ahead of us, but our lack of ability to truly choose which one was going to be the best for us, right? Decision paralysis. That's where an accelerator helps you, especially an accelerator, not an accelerator that has experience working with companies just like yours. And we were lucky enough, what's kind of why we chose them. They had worked with diagnostic companies like ours before. There was a portfolio company of theirs that was doing exactly what we were doing, but for prostate cancer. And they were able to sit down with us and say, that strategy you're working on sucks. It's going to take you forever. It's going to take you a lot of money. You will have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. You will need hundreds of thousands of patients. It won't work. It won't work as easily as you're thinking. Because why do we know? Because we've been there. Like, this company has been there. This is what they did. This is what you should do. And they helped us narrow our strategy. Not just that, but they also introduced us to people that understood the problem better than us. And in fact, one of our most active mentors during the program is now our advisor and investor, who is the VP, one of the VPs at Cigna Healthcare, which is one of the leading healthcare insurance companies here, health insurance companies. So all of this help, I always say that before the accelerator, we were just two scientists with an idea. after the accelerator, we were a company, and without that kind of support, I feel like we would have struggled a lot. Actually, after the accelerator, we managed to raise our first round, our pre-seed round, and then 2024 has happened since then, and we've been laser focused since then. And I think a lot of it is because of the help that we were able to get, not just through the accelerator, but also through the team that we've managed to build.
Mm. And what stage are you at right now? If you look at a typical startup, like Series A, Series B, or
Seed. We're
okay,
at seed.
I see. Yeah, because health tech is complex, right? Because the thing is, you have regulatory hurdles, you have financial hurdles as well, and then you have to ensure growth, right? So it's how do you say that? For example, B two B. Again, I come to B2B SaaS example because that's the easiest one to give. You launch a product, the easiest KPI is, say, you know what, five big customers signed. They don't pay money, it's okay, but we have five big customers, like the top tier companies, like Fortune 500 companies use our software. Based on that, you start selling to other people. What kind of KPIs, or how do you ensure growth for OncoSwab? Because right now you're in the process of clinical trials, which will take a few months to come to a conclusion from that. Meanwhile, you're not sitting at idle, right, in your apartment or home, like doing nothing. You have to do other things as well. So how do you ensure on the side the growth of the startup?
Oh, that's a great question. There are so many ways you can show traction. One of them is KOL engagement. So KOLs won't engage. They can engage with literally any technology, any startup, any company that's doing something important in your field. So if they decide to engage with you, that's a great signal of traction and validation. Another one is, these are the things that you can work on while you're waiting for results. Partnerships. Partnerships are great for companies like ours, diagnostics. Sometimes it's better to join a strategic or do a partnership with pharma than only get in venture capital, because they might be your future acquirers in the future. They might be the ones that, there are many ways to do it in a biotech company. You can do licensing agreements, you can do strategic partnerships, they can do a strategic investment that is then tied to an acquisition down the road. There are a variety of options. So you can definitely start those conversations with pharma while you're waiting for your results, to understand what they're looking for, what they want to see. And another thing is, of course, investment, right? Like fundraising. We fundraise just like any other startup. That's not well, I mean, it is different for sure. Like the metrics are different, as we said. And you comparing this company or biotech companies, healthcare companies with B2B SaaS is completely pertinent, and it makes total sense. And I do it to myself. Like, I'm based in the Bay Area. Most companies here are, of course, AI companies and like fintech companies, whatever, but like it's mostly AI. And when I hang out with AI founders or other founders that are not life science founders, I'm not gonna lie, I do get a little jealous of the speed they have. Like within 3 months, oh, we started 3 months ago, now we're raising 2 million because we already got X amount of customers, because we already built this and this and that. It's like, wow. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I want things done yesterday. Like, that's a big problem I have for this field that I'm in, because I love speed. I love moving fast. I love being effective. And as you say, it's not like we're now sitting around waiting for results. There are many, many, many things to do in a company like ours. But it is a little frustrating that at the end of the day, the true results and the true advancement are tied to your clinical results, which do take longer. So I won't lie. Sometimes I'm like, oh no, I wish we also had like that speed, because you can definitely still have momentum. I would say, in fact, that things are going really well for OncoSwab now, especially from a clinical perspective. But it's a different type of momentum. It's a different type of advancement, right? But to answer your question about how you measure success, it's all of those things. It's also you will still have meetings with your patent attorneys, right? So how well protected is your IP? What strategies can you do about it? That's also another way to show strengthening of the company, advancements of the company. So yeah, I feel like there are many, many, many other things that you can do besides waiting around for results.
Hmm. I mean, now going from here, going more towards the future, because you already touched upon it that you want to make it easy, accessible, cost effective, right? In the long run, what else is like in the future of cancer detection in general? because I can think of so many ideas, that would things you can do, but I'm not going to say anything because I'm not a biochemist, I'm an engineer. So what do you think is like, where do you see the future of cancer detection heading, for instance, in the next decade? Also considering we have now so much AI happening, like in general, it can process a lot of data like really, really quickly. And how do you plan to position OncoSwab in this rapidly evolving landscape? I mean, if we want to or we don't want to, but AI is going to be a part of everything, right? Like it can help in
Oh,
analysis like
100%.
really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, we at OncoSwab are aware of that, and we're not leaving AI behind. There's so much untapped potential for different recognition of patterns that are beyond any technology that we have for analyzing biomarkers. And that's where AI can come into play. AI can look at patterns that we cannot see ourselves, and that means enhancing the accuracy of diagnostic tests like ours. So I know because we're very, very aware of it, and we're working on it. And when it comes to the future of biotechnology, I think that AI is unlocking that potential to see things like from one single swab, from one single test. Allows the ability to see beyond that one indication that you're seeing, right? It allows the ability to maybe understand other lung injuries, other underlying conditions. And I think that's kind of where we're heading, to a more not unanimous, to a more harmonious, unified way of diagnosing diseases that at the same time focuses more on prevention than on care. I have to say though, while there is a tendency towards that, I do see a incongruency, if you will, between that movement of focusing on prevention versus what the healthcare system, namely payers, do understand as profitable. Of course, they care about ROI, and I struggle to see that there is a link between the two. Currently, I feel like there's still very much two different movements where us as a society, we're moving towards preventive medicine because and health insurance companies still want that ROI, which unfortunately comes at treating and not preventing. Because of that disconnection, I feel like the consumer market has been growing for preventive medicine, which I think is exciting as a business opportunity, but at the same time, I'm hoping that at some point it's more than a business opportunity and it just becomes a standard of care, like preventing instead of only treating.
That's true, and AI is definitely going to help. I mean, it's I use it for something called the blank canvas problem all the time. So I don't know what the problem is, and but I have a lot of data. I will tell it, look, I have this data, but I don't know how to analyze it. Like, give me ideas, and it comes up with the most interesting approaches because someone else did a paper on something and created a methodology. So I think that can also help towards the whole detection and analysis, right? But now moving towards, because you started the company when you were 24, you mentioned, right? So how has your journey as a young entrepreneur actually and scientist shaped your leadership style? Because leadership is always like, sometimes it's perceived good, sometimes it's not. And what lessons have you learned along the way of being a leader of being a CEO of a health tech startup?
Oh my god, so many things. I've learned so many things. I mean, it's interesting because I this is my first leadership position, of course, and it kind of like just happened naturally. Like we started a company and I kind of became a CEO. It's not like it was my long life dream to be a CEO. And in fact, I don't see myself as a CEO truly. I mean, I identify with the role, but internally, because CEO slash being a boss has, at least in my generation, kind of a negative connotation. That's not how I see myself. And I also don't see myself as a CEO of a big company. I love building, I love creating something from scratch, and I love my team, and I feel like we're very close. We're a small team, so it makes it very easy to communicate. And it also doesn't means that I don't have to spend most of my time managing everyone because we're not a huge team, right? So, but I've learned many things. And everybody in my team is an A+ player. Everybody is amazing, which means that I don't need to micromanage at all. They know a lot more than me in their field, in their specific position. So I listen to them and I learn from them. That's the number one thing. Another thing is I've learned to like see, like, I've learned to understand myself and get to know myself as a leader and what my flaws are, but I've also seen what my strengths are, and I have open communication and open conversations with my team, including my co-founder, about my leadership style, to see what they like that I should continue to do and what I should also get better at. So I think that that humble approach, in my opinion, is just being humble, understanding that, everybody has to learn. Everybody has a first time doing something, and that's totally fine. And for me, it's been just being very realistic about it, but at the same time, never doubting my potential to be a good leader. Because again, I had never been a leader before, but I knew I had it in me. That's also the reason why I became a founder. I knew I could be an inspiration to others. I knew I could be an example to others. And I truly think that leading with example is the only way to go. And I feel very fortunate to now be in the role where I'm at, where I can see that those things are just transforming into a reality. So yeah, I think I've learned, I guess, many lessons about being a leader, but most importantly about how to transform a simple idea into a reality, how complex it is, and how important communication has to be. Definitely made a lot of mistakes along the way as well, especially when it comes to communication. We are a remote team. I'm in the States, part of our team is in Europe. Communication is incredibly important. So I think another thing we've learned as a team, not just me as a leader, is how to effectively communicate in a way that nothing is left behind and nothing is misunderstood. Because especially speaking about important timelines and coordination, if you make a mistake when it comes to communication and milestones and goals, everybody's working hard, but they think that they're working towards the same goal, but they're not. So everybody is working on towards completely different projects, completely different milestones. And it's like that story of the plane that's going from London to New York, and then changes the course of direction like 1 degree or something like that, and then ends up in Los Angeles instead. It's exactly the same. You start up very aligned, but very small misalignments along the way, if there is no effective communication, can create immense differences and distances between team members. So that's another thing we've learned.
That's a lot of lessons, but moving from that towards like giving advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, because there would be people from biotech industry, right, who would also be listening. So what single advice would you give them? Because I feel you can give a lot of
One.
advice, but let's make it more complex.
All
What's
right.
what single advice would you give aspiring biotech entrepreneurs, particularly those
Okay.
looking to address challenges in health tech?
I actually have the answer. I told you that I hate those type of questions, like the one character, the one piece of advice. But I do know, because I've told this to myself so many times. My one piece of advice is to not take advice too seriously. Honestly, it's kind of counter saying, I know, but it's true. Like I was the one that was, I was one to be very concerned about what others said I should do, especially right at the beginning, because I had this, we all do, imposter syndrome, where I'm like, well, I'm a 24-year-old, I don't have no idea what I'm doing. Probably everybody else knows better than me because they have more experience. So what happens is that somebody having more experience in a certain field than you doesn't know that they will know what to do better than you will, because nobody knows your technology like you do. Nobody knows your field like you do. Nobody knows your company like you do. So yes, listen to advice, but learn how to filter it out. And also, most importantly, trust yourself, trust your intuition, trust your gut, because you became a founder for a reason. You decided to become a founder because you felt like you had it in you, so you do have it in you. Don't forget that. That's something I constantly have to tell myself.
How do you do it? Like in front of a mirror, like, hey, don't forget to trust in yourself.
No, no. Sometimes when I'm like, when my advisors, or I mean, now I have a very select group of people that I listen, and whatever they say to me is incredibly important. But other than that, people still, when you start a startup, that's the first thing people are going to do. They're going to tell you how to run your business. Like that's what people do. People love telling you how to run your business, as you know, right? So now I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, I'm listening to like 100 people telling me that I should do A, but you know what? I know that I should do B, and I'm just 100% certain of it. I think a year ago, I think even though I've been doing this for shy of 2 years, I have learned so much and changed so much and have been through many different phases within those 2 years. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, I will trust myself because I know that I'm trusting my gut, and this will probably be the right decision. And it's a well taken, it's a thought through decision, but I will still take it. Whereas a year ago, I'd be like, well, my gut is telling me I should do this. And I personally believe understanding all the metrics and understanding my market, I think I should do this. But all of these like experienced people with X amount of years of experience and titles are telling me I should do the other thing. So I must be wrong. And turns out that's not always the case.
Mm. No, 100%, 100%. I mean, I run this podcast, right? It's also a product at the end of the day, but I get so much advice. People give advice without knowing the whole context. I think that's human psychology, right?
Exactly.
So that you cannot change that.
Yeah, and you cannot do something that nobody's ever done before if you only follow what people tell you to do. At some point, you need to be disruptive, and being disruptive involves doing something that nobody's ever done before. So
Mm.
that's something also to tell yourself. Like when people tell you, "Oh, the podcast, you should do this, you should do that." I'm like, "Well, but I'm doing something. For me, it's a new concept. Like what I'm doing, my podcast, I want it to be completely different to what everybody else is doing. So that's why I'm gonna have my own unique style to it."
If you're launching a podcast, let me know. I would love to listen to it as well.
No, I meant
So,
your case, but yeah,
uh,
maybe one day you never know.
I mean, yeah, you never know. I mean, I'm always happy to listen to other people's opinion as well because it's always good sometimes. And I listen to more serious stuff like my own podcasts. Like some people find it really boring as well, but it's fine because it's not meant for everyone. It's meant for specific people, so who actually can learn from it and grow. But I think this wraps it all, the episode. And thank you so much today for joining us, Andrea. This was truly a great conversation and I really enjoyed it. And thank you also for sharing about OncoSwab. I wish you much success in the future. But is there something you would love to share with our listeners who stayed till the end, so to say, as a closing remark?
I guess my one message, considering that November is Lung Cancer Awareness Month, is to pay particular attention from the entire podcast. If there's one highlight, I think it's that question you asked about what you can do to raise awareness and to contribute to lung cancer in general, even if you're not affected by it or you don't know anybody affected by it. I think now is the time of the year to reflect on that and to make lung cancer a disease that we just talk about that's approachable, because it takes all of that to transform lung cancer from being a deadly disease in a death sentence to something you just talk about, treat, and act upon completely naturally.
No, thank you so much. Definitely, I will think of something as well. How can I support the whole lung cancer movement towards in November? And but thank you so much again. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning into the executives. If you found this episode valuable, you agree or want to learn more about Andrea or OncoSwab, the links would be mentioned in the description section, so you can actually go connect with her. Also, ask her questions if you have, or leave them in the comments. And meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe and share with your network. Until next time, this is Majid signing off.